Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Amelia. We're going to give people a few minutes to join. But my name is Amelia Ihlo. I run Rooted Farmers and also run a farm here in New Hampshire. We still are under quite a bit of snow. You can see out the door here in our tunnel. We're in zone 4B, but having some pretty warm days right now. So our snow is melting pretty quickly. But we run a farm here. We're kind of in the central New Hampshire, right on the Vermont border region. I also run a collective, and we sell down into the greater Boston area, and obviously also run Rooted Farmers, which is a platform. 3A, hello. We can see your comments here. So also under snow, I assume there in 3A. So we run Rooted Farmers. We are a platform for buying and selling locally grown flowers. We work with small and mid-sized farms across the country. We started Rooted in 2019. We really kind of got our start trying to solve our own problem for our farm and our collective here, trying to sell aggregated product to lots of aggregated buyers, and how do we manage that in a scalable way. And so that was kind of our origin story. We have been really excited to see all of the momentum in the kind of local flowers space over the years, and it's driven, I think a lot of growth both for us and the industry. And so we're now at a place where we're working with thousands of members across the country, and are really excited to be here today and to kind of answer questions and try to help add a little bit of color to selling wholesale and to florists and designers, and starting a collective. We've got so we've got a couple members of our team. Andrea and Carla are here. They are joined in the comments here, and they're going to be helping to sort of curate some questions. We do have a lot of questions already that have come in. We've posted on stories, and so we've got a good starting point. So I'll just jump right in. But if you do have questions, feel free to drop them. There's a little question mark icon at the bottom. Feel free to drop them in there, and then I will see them. If you do put them in the comments, Andrea and Carla will try to help get those up there. But let's dive in. So we've got a question from Hanny Beth, who is just asking, what is the best way to start selling to florists and designers? I will say just start small. We've got a really great blog post on our blog. So if you go to rootedfarmers.com and you just hop into the blog right on our public website there, you can kind of see some of the content that we've been producing, and you're able to kind of scroll through and see lots of helpful content. So starting there, we do have an article that you can take a look at for reference. So starting slow is our first tip. You really do want to kind of try to bite off a manageable amount when you're getting started. You don't want to take on more relationships than you're really able to service, especially if you're just getting started. There are going to be so many things that you're needing to learn. There's a steep learning curve there, obviously, to growing, but there's also a steep learning curve to selling to florists and wholesale and designers. And they're not all going to work the same, and so it's really important to be having those conversations. I know as farmers, we're often introverts, and we don't want to be doing all the peopling and having conversations, but that is really the key to building those relationships. You want to be communicating clearly with them. Remember that for these florists and designers, their reputation is really, they're staking it on you and your product. And so if they aren't confident about what it is that you're going to be offering for them, that it's going to represent their brand really in the way that they're hoping, they're going to be less likely to purchase from you. So you do that by just kind of walking in and sharing what you're doing and sharing what your plan is, and sharing samples, because as much as we say, there's only so much trust you can build without actually kind of putting your product right in front of them. So bringing buckets of samples and just kind of saying, here, I want to leave this with you and try it, see how it works, and I'm going to check in with you again in a week, and be sure to follow up there too, because you do want the feedback, and you do want to hear kind of what their experience was like. How did it work? What questions do they have? And be open to that feedback, because it does help you to learn and to grow. And at the end of the day, that's your goal, right? Is to grow your business and to really grow those relationships. And you can't do that if you're not willing to hear the feedback and willing to have the conversation. So definitely be open to that. At the same time, I would say be really conscious of their time. Their time is precious. They are running a small business just like all of us are. And so if you're taking a lot of their time, you're gonna end up kind of working against yourself there. So do be conscious of when you visit. If you're going to, an event designers on a Friday, that's not great timing, because they are trying to put events together for the weekend. So think about their week, and think about, potentially call ahead, see if they've got time on a Monday or a Tuesday to see you when they're a little bit less busy. And also just be patient, right? Like they're not going to just flip a switch. So as soon as you walk in the door, say, okay, now I'm doing all my buying from you. It's going to take time to grow those relationships. So I would just say, remember that, be patient with them, be patient with yourself, try to be consistent. And that's, in your communication and what your schedule looks like. If you're showing up on a different day every week with product, that can be hard for them to build trust. So take a look at that article, because that's on our blog again, just rootedfarmers.com. And you can scroll through and see, kind of print that out and just have it as a reference point as you're getting going. We've got a question from Paperbird Flower Farm asking about collectives. So Paperbird asked about, what is the best way to determine if member growers are able to supply volume to sustain a co-op or a collective? There are a lot of ways to get at this. It's a great question. I think asking about their acres in production, asking about the number of varieties that they're growing is helpful. Trying to get a sense for, do they have a sense of their own volume, is also helpful. Asking them about past production, I would say, is a great place to start. Be aware of their other channels. So it can be misleading if you hear that you've got a farm that's got lots of product. If they have lots of other channels that are higher priority than the co-op or the collective or the hub, that's something to be aware of, because even if they've got tons of product, if they are prioritizing their own, wedding and event design business, or if they're prioritizing their own farmers markets, and you're just going to get the excess, that's not super helpful to you. So despite their production capacity, I would just say have an open conversation about what their goals are, and really trying to understand what their preferred channels are there. Willow Hill Florals asked, how much debt is normal debt? So farm finances are fair game here. Happy to talk through it. We are not the authority on all things, but happy to have a conversation there. So how much debt is normal debt? It seems like a lot of farms start with loans. I'm not a huge advocate for starting with loans. I think, when you're just getting started, there are so many things that you have to learn. And debt can really add a huge amount of pressure to you and to your decision making and your business. And so if you're taking on a lot of debt, you're going to be motivated to, potentially grow in directions that don't feel like they're really sustainable or healthy for you, for your business. So I would just say really be careful with that. Our farm never took on debt for that. It is why a lot of farms, 80% of small farms in the US are sustained by off-farm income. that's a conversation for another time, but it is part of why is, you know, trying to support your farm just through debt, and really get off the ground. That's a really tough way to start. So it's not something I'd really encourage you to go down that path. We've got another question from Hanny Beth asking about, kind of two questions here, asking about what are florists looking for flowers, standard stem size, leaves, no leaves, etc., and how to find pricing averages or how to price your flowers. Pricing is like a giant topic, and we will talk a little bit about it, but I think, you know, I will just start by saying it's not an exact science. There's no like one right answer to pricing. It is really tough. It's really tough to get it right, and to, you know, it's an evolution. It's not going to be the same from one season to the next, and it could change from 1 month to next. You know, if you're the only one who's selling peonies in your region, you know, we've got a row of peonies in our tunnel here, so we come on a few weeks early. If you're the only one selling peonies and you're the only place to get it, you can get away with a little bit higher price than your neighbors might. I will say, as a general rule, you should be pricing it by the stem, but making sure you're selling it by the bunch. You want to keep in mind that you are trying to make the math really easy for your buyers. This is how we list product. This is how we sell it on Rooted. This is how all of our growers and collective sell product, is pricing by the stem, so it's really clear what is the price. And we sell by the bunch. Growers can tend to bunch things in what feels like it makes sense, and to growers, but that can be really tough math for a designer to do really quickly. So you got to remember, they're trying to price for recipes. So doing 5 and 10 stem bunches is really simple for them. But if some of your flowers are sold in like 7 stem bunches or 13 stem bunches, or next week it's 15 stem bunches, and they have to constantly be revisiting, you know, the more friction you add to that buying relationship, or how long it takes them to make a decision, the harder it is. So I would say just stick to pricing by the stem, and standardize your bunch sizes so that it's really easy for them to make a really quick decision there. As a very general rule, your stem length is probably the single biggest driver to your pricing. So the longer a stem is, the easier it's going to be for that to be a versatile product. So they can use it. If you think about the end use case, you know, if it's only ever going to go into a boutonniere, you can't put it into a great big bouquet. So the longer the stem, the more versatile that stem is for the designer to use in lots of different types of arrangements. So typically, the longer the stem, the higher you can price that product. I really think, you know, having conversations with your buyers is going to be your best bet. I think also take a look at this book. So this is our reference book. You can see all my Post-its and everything in here. This is going to be really helpful for you to get a sense of harvest stage, which is also a huge driver of pricing for you. So understanding, you know, if you're selling things that are past and they're only going to hold for, you know, you've cut it when it's pollinated, for example, and it's not supposed to be cut pollinated, and it's only going to hold for a couple of days. If they're getting that product from you on a Wednesday and they're intending to use it on Saturday, but you've cut it at a place where it's actually not going to last past Friday, that's useless to them. They're not able to use that, and so for them, they've now paid for something that they can't use. So they have to build that into their pricing, which is really frustrating for them, and it could end up meaning that they just don't come back to you. So keep that in mind. Look at this book. You know, I think this is a great example. It's going to tell you for pretty much anything you're growing. You know, stage of harvest. When should you be cutting things? When, you know, you've got harvest the flowers when they're a third to half of the flowers are open. I'm looking at snapdragons right now. I would say get that book. It's really worth it. It's helpful for you if you've never sold wholesale before. That's probably your greatest resource at understanding, how do I cut for these designers? Like, what are they expecting? So I would highly recommend that. We have a few other questions here. I've printed them out, and then I know we have some in the questions there too. let's see, Bloman Farm is asking, what is the typical difference in wholesale versus retail versus grocery store pricing for the same flower? That's an interesting question. So, I think we think about pricing product per channel depending on the type of product it is. So if you're trying to sell straight bunches to a grocery store, that's not the sort of thing that universally will be interesting or helpful or useful to a grocery store. Some grocery stores it will, but it could be that they're really looking for bouquets. And so if you're selling a different product to them, I think it's just being aware of that. A lot of florists aren't going to want your market bouquets. So you kind of think about the product type by channel. So we do a fair amount of work with Whole Foods. And we sell bouquets. They happen to, some grocery stores actually do weddings and events and things like that. And in that case, they might be interested in your straight bunches. We actually don't price differently on our straight bunches at all. So if you are a grocery store and you'd like to buy our straight bunches, we're going to sell you at the same price that we would to any of our florists. And so we don't differentiate straight bunch pricing. We do offer bouquets to them, and we wouldn't offer those to our florists and designers, because we're really looking at that grocery channel as kind of being a place, essentially for overflow. So what is the product that we didn't sell to our florists and our event designers, and how do we package that up into something that is interesting and useful and appealing to the grocery store buyer, who just is a different customer. It's just a completely different customer segment. The person who's walking into the grocery store to buy a bouquet of flowers, a market bouquet, is not the same person who typically is walking into an event designer and trying to, plan for their wedding. And so we differentiate the products and the pricing. We don't differentiate pricing on cut flower bunch, so like straight bunches, so bunches of 5s and 10s of things that we're going to sell to designers. That's going to be the same price to grocery versus wholesale florists. Retail, I think we look at a little bit differently. So for the market bouquets, we're going to double that pricing for retail. So we'll sell it at about 50% of what we would retail to the grocery store. So our price to Whole Foods is going to be about half of what we would price it if we were selling it direct to a consumer. When we're looking at DIY brides, I think those tend to be more in bulk buckets, and we're still going to mark those up. So, florists like bulk buckets of foliage and bulk buckets of dahlias, and they will use things like that if you're thinking about like color families. So like here's a blush bucket or a whites bucket. We will still mark that up to DIY brides, to retail customers. Your retail customers should not be paying the same price that your florists are paying. They just shouldn't. What markup makes sense? I think it depends on the product again. So if it's straight bunches, it could be 20 to 30% markup. If it's bouquets, again, it's going to be a double. It's going to be 100%. So really depends on the product there. But hopefully that's helpful context. I'm going to see what we've got here for questions. What is the book called? I think the name of the book was answered in the comments. So, but it is Specialty Cut Flowers, and it's the ASCFG book. Judy Lauschman wrote it with Alan Armitage, and it's great. I think it did go out of print at one point. I don't know if it's back in, but would just say take a look. Try to Google that. We got it online years ago, but I would try to buy a copy of that if you can. Let's see. Would you recommend Union Mills flowers? Would you recommend, if looking to sell to a florist, bringing them a sample bucket of flowers for them to play with? Absolutely. Yes, 100%. That is the best way. If you really think about what is their worry when they're bringing on a new supplier? Well, it's that your stuff doesn't work well for them, right? Like, maybe it won't last. Maybe they need to vase test it. And even our designers who we work with and have worked with will say, if they are buying something new from us that they have not worked with before, they're going to pull some of it and just vase test it themselves and leave it on their counter so they can watch it. And it's just because they want to see how it behaves, how it ages. They want to understand what it works like. And so yes, 100%. And samples are a great way for you to kind of build your business. Great question. Let's see. How would you approach a grocery store with the idea? The idea of selling, I just call them. You just call them and talk to them. Typically, the buyer for flowers either is their own buyer, so floral department can have their own buyer, or they work underneath the produce arm of the grocery store. So I would just call and talk to them and say, hey, I know I'm cold calling you. I have a question. Don't expect them to always answer it. Sometimes you got to call them like 5 times, 6 times, 10 times, and just be a squeaky wheel. Be polite and kind, but they're busy too, and so just recognizing they're not always going to answer, and you need to follow up there. Golden Cut Flower Farm. If my peonies get mildew and brown spots after they bloom, are they still safe to sell? No, they are not still safe to sell. Your product quality is what you're putting out there. And so if you are selling something that you know is compromised, that's just not a great practice. And it doesn't represent you well. It doesn't represent other farms well. So I would say definitely no, don't sell it if it's really compromised, if you've got brown spots. Sometimes you can end up harvesting and some of the leaves on the plant will not look happy. Just pull them off. That's okay. But if your blooms actually have mildew and brown spots all over them, I would not sell those. Let's see. I just started my first seed set and they grew mold on the seeds. Are they doomed? I would say I'm not going to be your best resource on that. I know Lisa has tons of resources and classes on seed starting. So I would just head over to the Gardener's Workshop website and look at some of those classes and resources, because I think she's much more the authority on seed starting and troubleshooting there than I'm going to be. Let's see. We've got Dog Rose Acres has asked, I've found wholesale price lists online. Should I anchor my prices on this and then add 20%? I would be careful about wholesale price lists. I think your products are not always going to be the same as what you find on those wholesale price lists. So you may not be looking at apples to apples for one. I think also we tend to see very different shrink rates. So the shrink rate from an imported bunch of flowers is different from the shrink rate. That's basically of 10 stems, what percentage of those stems can the florist just not use? And that shrink rate it's very dependent on what is the flower. But for something like dahlias, can be pretty high. So it can be 30% or 40% or 50% of the bunch is unusable with something like dahlias specifically, because they're not meant to ship out of water. They're not meant to ship, they're open when they're put in these cardboard boxes and they're getting dinged up. So, it depends on the product. But typically the percentage of the blooms that a florist can use from local growers, is going to be much higher than the percentage of the blooms that they can use on some of those other products, and especially comparable alternatives, right, that they're getting through their wholesaler. I also am going to say anchoring, like just a blanket 20% across the board is not always going to make sense. It might sometimes, but it may not. Again, it's not an exact science pricing your product. I think it's recognizing that there are a lot of variables. Your stem length may not be the same as somebody else's stem length. Your bloom size may not be the same. If you're selling things like Lysianthus and it's a spray, you know, the price for a single stem that just has one branch or two branches is not going to be the same as something if you've got like 5 branches. Those are not equivalent products, and so it's really important to recognize that they aren't, and they shouldn't be priced the same way. And it's okay to have a few different pricing tiers, almost like tranches of pricing. So, you know, what are your premium cuts? What are your standard cuts? What are your kind of short or like just sort of like seconds almost? And think about what those different pricing tiers might look like for you. They still, we just did a podcast actually with Scott Shepard, and so you can go check that out. But we did a 2-part there, talking about pricing product and trying to really understand, you know, there's still value. So let's say anemones, it's spring. Let's talk about anemones. You know, your first cuts there are going to be really short. They still have value, but they're just not going to be priced the same as your second cut. So as that stem length is, you know, kind of lengthens, and you've got, you know, like 6-inch stems are not the same product as 12-inch stems on the same flower. You can use them. They still have value, but they shouldn't be priced the same. And that's okay. Your florists are going to be happy with that, understanding that, you know, there are different price points for different products. They'll actually feel really good about that typically, because they're going to feel like, yep, I'm paying less for these, which, you know, they might throw into a boutonniere or something that's shorter. And I'm paying more for these, and then I can sort of split what do I need for which type of product that I'm creating, and what makes sense there. What would you say, Dahlia Sutliff 97 says, what would you say is a good sample size? Depends on the florist. I think, you know, it also depends on what you have. I try not to be stingy, and this is even like throughout the season, we're typically adding to our bunches, and it just builds goodwill. So if we've got